Hello, everyone. That's the first time I've ever hit the 0 button on time. Isn't that exciting? Welcome to those of you that have been on here for a long time. You know the deal. So the next hour, we're going to be in that program up there. Capture One, that being the software that is written by the clever guys out in Copenhagen. I'm not one of those clever guys. And that's one of the reasons that we can talk quite frankly about that software on here, because I'm not on their payroll. Isn't that nice? But those are the guys that make the raw editing software that a lot of you already use. Some of you don't use, may be interested in knowing what the differences are and what it does. But essentially, as you all know the spiel by now, so light comes into your camera through your lens, lands on a sensor, and that sensor records it in two formats. Typically, one is what we refer to as JPEG, but it can be another flat format. So in other words, a processed version of what your camera has seen. And the other is a raw format, which your eyes cannot see, but it's in theory, more accurate rendition of all the data that the sensor got from that lens of the light that was in front of it. And the reason that we capture that raw data is because using a raw processor, like Capture One, other processors are available, it means that we can edit that picture away from what the camera processed as its JPEG and into what we remember seeing at the time. Remember that what we see is often different to the raw data that your camera sensor captured. What we're seeing is through our brains, through our eyes. We're all unique. We all see different things. We all feel different things. We all have different moods when we're taking pictures. Cameras have different settings as well, which we might want to either counter or enhance. So for all those reasons, we run it through software and we get to, hopefully, our perfect picture. If it is not perfect as a picture, well, hopefully we can try and help you. That's the point of this hour. So, welcome to those people that didn't know that's what we're doing. Those of you that do know, you know the deal. Please shout, heckle, comment, complain, challenge, I don't know, congratulate, celebrate, all those different words. But hopefully this is an interactive session. If you're watching this in the future or in my past, obviously I can't interact with you. Time travel doesn't really exist yet. So if you put something in the comments down there, somewhere down there, we'll try and answer them in the future. But obviously it's better if you make it. There we go. For those of you that want to know when it's next up, as in the next live session, our website, number one, so you can go to that link down below. Number two, in the playlist, and I have corrected it. Who was it that pointed out? Someone pointed out Michael. We corrected the next up session. But three, if you hit the, I don't even know where it is, but there's a button down there that says subscribe or something. It will tell you when. It will tell you when we're next going live. It will tell you when we're planning to, and it will tell you when we're about to. That's easy, right? Right. Paul, first telling off of this session. We'll cover that in a second. Right. For all intents and purposes, we're on the latest version of Capture One, the latest public version. So everything in this session we're going to be running is version 16.6.6. That version was a relatively small release, but it meant that Capture One gained full support for a Nikon ZR. Nikon ZR. From day one, or day zero as they call it, and a new 85mm lens, I think, from memory, but that's it. Obviously, with every version, you'll find bug fixes and whatever that have gone in there. But for those of you thinking that that was a special little Easter egg ready for some operating system changes, it is not. That was not the deal. The deal was to produce ZR support, nothing more, nothing less. We'll look at a couple of things in a second. So before we go any further, how do you get your files into here to edit? You go there. So you go to paulreeferlive.wetransfer.com. You can upload your file. You can include what you've tried, what you'd like to do, what you're struggling with. Do include your name. If you don't include your name, we will not include your file. Very simple. And also don't assume that we know you from the last time you sent a file in 6 years ago. We don't keep a track of everyone's email addresses and names. So unfortunately, while you all see me, I don't see you. It's very difficult to remember who you are based on your random email addresses. So please include your names. Huh. There we go. Let's talk about four little things. Number one, there's still spaces on that. If you want to go and explore Jurassic Coast in March, do that. There's a link down there. Teamwork are good guys. We're traipsing around cliff tops and all that sort of stuff. It's good fun. So if you come along, great. Second, those of you that got one of these, they're all gone, by the way. It's too late. Well done. We managed to lose money on almost every single one of them. Congratulations, you did me proud. But hopefully they've all started arriving. There is a batch, I think, of 16 that have just finished their print run. So if you're still waiting on one, don't worry. It's in the works. We knew they were going to take some time. Hopefully you did too. But that was quite fun. So as a collaboration with the guys at Docu Magazine, so have a look at Thomas's other stuff. You'll find it online. It's quite a fun little way of getting prints out there into people's hands in an accessible way. But anyway, so have a play. But yeah, if you missed the boat, sorry, it's too late. It's gone, sailed. Right, talking about missing the boats, Paul. Well, your second comment up. macOS Tahoe. Wait. And I'm not saying that from Capture One's perspective. So I know that there are people that have already been daring enough to update it. You don't get a badge for it, by the way. You don't get a prize for being the first person to update. What you do get is misery if you made a mistake in updating, because it's very difficult to downgrade, unfortunately. But I say this every time with every OS update, and it doesn't matter whether it's Windows or macOS or anything. Check all of your software. All of your software. Not just your raw processor, but also your pixel editor. Also your choice of email client, if it's maybe not built into the OS. Also your applications for graphics, for spreadsheets, for whatever. Check all of your systems before you upgrade the one that they all run on. Always. Also bear in mind that the first version of an operating system update tends to be quite major, tends to have a few niggles, let's call them that, or unexplored design features. Let's go with that. Those things are not possible for them to find out during beta. It is not possible. Please, people, get this out of your head that by the time it's gone live into production, every bug has been found. The first real test for any new piece of software is when it's in production. With production stuff, it's normally the 0.1 release that resolves the biggest of the known issues when it first gets released. Some people choose to wait for 0.1. You don't have to wait until 0.1, but you have to be comfortable that all of your applications work. And I can tell you now for a fact that Capture One have not said, yet, that Tahoe is fully supported, to my knowledge. And I don't think anyone else has found it either, as a statement. So please, when it comes to operating systems, if you want to go for it, then go for it. Have a test system, give it a go, but have a test system for it. If you're using this as a hobby and you don't care if something goes wrong, then great, knock yourselves out. But if you're using this as your primary computer with all of your photos on and all of your other data and all of your other systems and all your other software that you use, oh, you've got to be careful gambling on that because you're playing red and black. You really are. I've known people, in UK terms, end of tax year, so 31st January for self-employed people is always a horrible period of time. I've known people do their upgrade for their operating system upgrade to a brand new version on like the 20th of January, and they hadn't done their tax return yet. What are you thinking? So please, and it is a please, don't surround Capture One with support calls for Tahoe yet. Don't go onto technical forums and say my thing doesn't work in this operating system that wasn't listed as supported, because you're wasting your time. Wait until things are supported. There's no hurry. You don't win anything. Nothing. There's no prizes. This is the bit I don't understand. I'm a tech nerd. I've got a system here with Tahoe on it. It's lovely. I like it. But I don't need it right now to edit my photos or to do my other pieces of work or to do video stuff, whatever. I don't need it right now on day one. It's lovely getting new stuff, but it's not fun if it breaks something else. There we go. Now, talking about new stuff in a more fun way. So, Paul, hopefully that's a ticking off. But good Paul haven't updated and probably won't until Canon have done it. Exactly. It's not even your software. Printer drivers, camera drivers, memory card readers, hard drive stuff. It all needs to be checked through. And the manufacturers, trust me, they used to try and do it in beta. They used to try and check all this stuff during the beta program on the basis that when it went into production, they could say they were fully supported. And what happened was, going back to what I said earlier, more and more the software companies snuck a few things in between beta and production. And it caught those manufacturers and those software companies out. So as a result, a lot of these companies will not say on day zero, yep, it's fully supported, because they don't even know what's in the full production version that went out there. So take a leaf out of their book almost and just settle, breathe, wait, just see. No big deal. Right. But an interesting new version is this one. Not a brand new version. It's an update to the existing Capture One app. So the Capture One mobile app. If you have Capture One all in one, your subscription includes the mobile version. If you bought it separately, then it will include this update. That's fine. If you don't have it, you can choose. You can either buy an all-in-one subscription, or you can subscribe to the app separately. The differences in the new version of the app. So three big things. Number one, retouch. So the same thing that was brought to your Capture One desktop for portraits, so blemish removal, skin smoothing, all that stuff live in RAW, so you're not having to take it into an external editor. That's been built into the mobile app now. That's quite fun, especially if you're using your phone to do some of these your images into Capture One. Number two, it now supports sessions on mobile. It's quite fun. So you've now got, well, frankly, some better file structure and better organization and folders. And number three, finally, you are able to work from an external drive. Now, in terms of portability, obviously you've got to bear in mind that that drive's going to need to be plugged in. You're going to have to think about storage solutions and whatever. People like Limonus make the little iPad DigiPlate, the cheese plate thing, that you can sort of customize and screw in drives on the back and stuff like that. It makes the station a bit bigger. But there are different ways of doing it. But what it does mean is you're no longer limited based on what the onboard storage is on your iPad. You can use an external drive to do it. Get a fast one, please, if you're going to do that. But USB-C to an external drive, especially if it's SSD, nice and fast. Now you can organize that into sessions, which is now aligned with the new session update with Capture One, and you've now got access to the Retouch app, which you didn't have before. So all those three things are now in the latest version of mobile, which is yours if you already have it. So click on update. There you go. That's exciting, isn't it? Right. For those of you that are going to ask questions about specific things, we have those masterclasses, which you can click on the link down there to get access to. And we have an entire playlist in this channel called Pro Tips, which covers individual tools. Because today we're going to go probably relatively-ish deep dive into mid-tone contrast and getting pop into images. And we're going to start with, well, I can't hold it. It's all right, Edwin, don't worry. We're going to do yours. I could have got to the very end and then just accidentally run over it, but that's cruel. So Edwin, hopefully, if he's not online, there's going to be trouble. So we delayed this one by a couple of weeks to make sure that Edwin could see it. So Kingfisher shot. In general, this is a nice, calm, pleasing. It's composed nicely. It's a decent shot. It's sharp in the right places. It's the right toning. If I go to before and after, so if I press up here, I've got my before and after option. If I click on there, I get a side swipe, so I can go between before and after. If I click on this little arrow, I can change that behavior to be full view versus split. Up to you. But we can see our before shot. So this was almost out of camera. Those of you that have been on here for a while know that it's not quite out of camera. It's been interpreted in some sense by something called a film curve. And that curve is based on because it was shot with a Fuji, is based on the film simulation from the Fuji. Capture One reads that and it has them built in. Lovely. More on that in the next shot of lightning. The next shot of lightning, that sounded quite more exciting than it's going to be. Normally in Capture One, if you don't have film simulations or it hasn't read it in from the camera, it's going to say that it's using auto. Auto for a Fuji camera means the film simulation that was chosen. Auto for any other camera, pretty much, I think some of the Nikon ones have now brought across some simulations, but for most other cameras, if it says auto and you don't have a simulation selected, it's using film standard. So this original here, by the way, your curve, your before, is always going to show that simulation. So in other words, if I create a new variant and I change that variant to say film standard, it's going to show me the difference in film standard from there to there. In fact, let's change it. Let's go to a Fuji black and white simulation. So it's going to show me it here, but my before is always going to be the one that was baked in, which is this Fuji Astia. And that's a challenge for Fuji users, because you're missing the, I guess, the film standard approach if you've got that profile built in, and you'll see in the next image why that's important. But to all intents and purposes, this is the before. This is Edwin's edit. If I look at that edit in here, a few masks in here. So we've got a subject mask that Capture One has chosen. I press the M key on my keyboard to see a mask. Press M to make it disappear. To get that subject, clicked up there, and it's worked out the Kingfisher as a subject. The background mask, right there. Now, why would we want these two specifically, rather than just using an AI brush to say, click on the bird, click on everything else? The reason for using the subject and the background mask specifically is if I've got a series of images with the same subject in, but that subject is moving, I don't want to recreate the mask every single time. Even an AI mask, it's not going to know to look for a subject. It uses AI to find the mask and set the mask in place. But to the next image, it's not going to move it. It's not going to learn. It's not intelligent in that sense. The irony, AI not being intelligent. Whereas your subject and your background mask are specifically looking for the same subject and same background across all your different images. So as long as Capture One finds it correctly, which in this case it has, I would absolutely use that, because if you have a series of images, you can copy your adjustments and paste them across to the rest of that series. So we've got a subject mask, a background mask. The subject mask has got a little bit of an exposure lift, a little bit of a levels shift, a big mid-tone curve. We'll talk about that in a second. I think a little bit of clarity, a little bit of dehaze, all the things, a little bit of everything. The background mask, not so much. There's a little bit of bump here. I would challenge, just to think logically about this, if I've got a background mask with a lift in the curve and a foreground mask with a subject mask with a lift in the curve, there is almost an argument to say, well, why wouldn't you just have a base layer for everything with a lift in the midtones of the curve? Because if you're applying it to every different element, you may as well, especially given that there may be subtle little things missing between those two masks. So if you think about what I've just said, imagine you have a boundary between a house and a tree, and the subject mask has got the house, and the tree mask has got the tree, but there was some stuff in between, like when you see through the leaves and all that sort of stuff. So let's imagine I lift my exposure on the tree, great, and I lift my exposure on the house, great. I think I've now effectively done a lift of exposure across all of the different image or parts of the image, but I haven't, because those two masks didn't capture the bit in between the tree, for example. On here, you might find that on the boundaries between the bird and the background, there might be some discrepancy between the mask for the background and the mask for the bird. Let's have a look here and here. Probably not in this case, but just be careful of this. If you're doing the same adjustment to two different layers, but those layers in effect cover the whole image, I would recommend just having a single global layer, filled layer. So click in here, add new filled adjustment layer. And that filled layer will give you the ability to make global adjustments that don't have any risk of a part of the mask not being in, or part of the image not being in either mask. Right, we have a twig mask here. And we're going to cover this in a second as well. But there's obviously some complication here because we've got some stuff hanging on that twig. If I look at the before, this probably looks a bit more convincing. This looks a little bit over, but we'll see. Some detail mask around the Kingfisher's face. What do we got? Bit of sharpening, basically. So that will probably sit in, here. So a huge amount of clarity, bit of structure, just to try and fix, I guess, some of the movement in there. And then a linear graduated filter for the top, just to darken that down, I'm guessing. Well, yeah, so from too light to a bit darker there. Now that linear one at the top, just to flag, yes, it's darkened it down, it's half a stop down, and reduced some contrast. When we reduce contrast and we reduce exposure, the risk is that you lose some perceived saturation. So even though this has gone up a little bit to 8, you notice how it still looks grayer up here than down here? I would personally use more white balance to try and shift that and then put in a bit more saturation. So let's just, I'm just going to reset this one back to, was it Astia? I think, yeah, Astia. So this is Edwin's. This is going to be my version of it. So if we look at these two, look at how grey that one looks now compared to there. So if ever you're doing a pull down because something is too bright or washed out, when you darken it down, you're not going to gain extra saturation. It's not just the brightness that's hit it, it's also the saturation. So I would use a mix, actually. So white balance to a certain extent. Yeah, maybe we could get away with a little more of a pink in there. Let's get our yellow and make it a bit more green in the color editor. So remember, I'm still on that same layer, the graduated filter at the top. So this layer. But I'm using then the color editor just to shift the yellows to be more green without having to change tint overall. And I can lift that saturation. It means that I can actually pull the exposure down a bit more. So if we were trying to get rid of that bit up there, that's probably an easier way of doing it. Okay. Oh, good point, Bill. Yes, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, didn't we? With your subject and background mask, of course, you can do it this way, which is you can make your subject mask, make any edits that you want, changes. Then you can copy that mask. So let's imagine I've got my subject mask here. Create a new layer. This has no mask on it. Right click, copy mask from subject. And then I can right click and say invert mask. So if I've edited the subject mask at all, I can then invert it and I get effectively a nice, clean inverse of the mask. The problem is, of course, so if this adjustment layer 1 is my inverse, if I copy these adjustments across to the next shot, my subject mask will recalculate. My inverse mask will not. It's fixed. So bear that in mind. It's not quite as simple as just clicking and hoping that that's going to be good. So yes, it is a way. Other ways may be available. Right. Let's go back into here into the bird. So there is one problem with the subject mask. Just a flag. I'm going to go into my background mask here. So the subject mask has picked up. Sorry, let me just go into there. The bird. Yeah. But the background mask has only picked up the background minus the twig. So the twig is having nothing done to it. But it is. Because there's a problem, which is our subject mask actually has a bit of the twig built in. This bit. So all of that work that Edwin's done, you can see we're being unfair here because we're quite up close. Let's have a little reminder, everyone. What tool are we next going to click on? Answers on the screen, please. So we'll go into it in a second. But you can see here, look at the difference. Where the Kingfisher has been very, very, very sharpened and had some structure added and had some clarity added and whatever, we've got quite a lot of noise in there. We're at 400%. It's a little unfair. But the twig doesn't. The problem is this bit of the twig does. And the reason is because the subject mask, which has got all those changes done to it, has also included the twig. So what we'll find is if I start removing the twig from the subject mask, you see how this noise starts disappearing? The reason is because it's only the subject mask that's got that going on. So this is why I say be really careful whenever you're using a subject mask, and also be careful with stuff like this. It's not very nice. I'm going to just put a very low opacity, very small brush in there and just try and sort of blend this in. This is the problem with sharpening at edges and corners and transition points. You get this, you get all of your noisy effect applied right where it's the most obvious. In other words, where it transitions from something that's very clean to something that's very noisy. These two here were hot pixels. You've all let me down. You're supposed to be taking notes that week. So in my details tab here, we've got on our image layer. Single pixel noise reduction set at 3. These two here need a bit more than that, so I'm going to up that. Oof, way too much. Okay, interesting. Not able to necessarily do it. Someone asked, however, the other week, is there a downside to using single pixel noise reduction too much? Yes. So remember I said about it can delete stars. Be aware of that. But also look at this. Look at this noise. Use the single pixel noise reduction. It starts deleting the noise. So it goes from crispy pixels, which is what single pixel's designed to look at. Now what I'm wondering is, could I use that my benefit? And I think I can. So here, yes, it's sharper because the tools have been really quite abused, Edwin. Be careful with that. But I get the need. It needed some work. So if I look at the before, we can see here, you know, it is noisy. It's a ISO 3200. Not sure what camera we're on. Where are we? An XF5. Oh, sorry. Where are we? Fujifilm XH2. Okay. So I get it, but in the need to make this sharp, having done pretty heavy noise reduction, I'm assuming. Yeah, so your noise reduction's way up here. To bring that detail back, you then use the sharpening, we've used the contrast, we've used the structure and all that sort of stuff. And I think it's just a bit too much. Do we undo it all the way? I'm not sure. But interestingly, this single pixel noise reduction is actually doing a good job of almost blurring it a little bit to soften some of that crackliness almost. I'd be tempted maybe to leave it like that. Yeah, okay. So be careful with your masks, your subject masks. Where things like this exist along here, this twig layer, get it? It's just it starts to look a little bit from a distance. It just looks like it's too much of a heavy transition. I think in my head, there's no subtlety between this and its background. And if I look at here, look, so it's not just a case that it's bright white in front of a dark background. You can see through it. I can see this sort of color of the background here, this yellowy green that sits in these gaps. After processing with that mask, that starts to disappear. And I'm not sure that's the best route, but nothing bad is happening with it, so we'll go with it. Right, micro contrast, so especially in the midtones. The problem with a lift of the midtones, so especially if I go to our subject mask and look at this sort of curve here, what we're doing is we're leaving our shadows where they were. We are pulling up the lower shadows, or the lower midtones, so the upper shadows. We're really pulling up the middle bits, and then we're slowing the rate of change as it gets towards the highlights. So the highlights and the shadows stay the same where they are. They're anchored down here and up here. But the midtones lift and expand. So basically, if you imagine you're getting that histogram and you're squishing it, you're taking the bits that were at the edges and you're moving them in towards the middle. You're lifting the midtones. You're making shadows become lighter, highlights become darker, and if highlights become more into the midtone, you're lifting the entire. Not forget highlights are darker. That was a mistake or misstep. You're effectively lifting everything to be in that middle grey territory. Now that's fine if you want to lose contrast, because that's what you're effectively doing. You're squishing everything up there. If I undo this, you can see how dark that bird is. Now, obviously, it was darker in the original. It was slightly underexposed, if anything. If I look at our actual original, we can look in here. So even though there's a huge amount up here in the sort of upper midtones and highlights, that's mostly this background. This Kingfisher here sits pretty much in this little lump down here of darkness. Whereas here, the Kingfisher is now in this group cluster. It's been lifted a little bit, but the dark bits have gone as well. And I'm not a huge fan of that. So I'm all up for lifting it, making it brighter, but I still want to keep some contrast. So what I would do, personally, with the Kingfisher one, is I would use brightness a little bit, and exposure a little bit more, but I would not be pulling up these midtones. I would be leaving those shadows there. I might lift some of this. And then I'm actually going to use a little bit of HDR to get to there. And the reason is if I look here, this feels flatter. It's very subtle, but it's flatter than here. This almost has a 3D depth to it. This one on the right now, the original edit, starts to lose that a little bit. And hopefully that comes across on your screens. So all I've done, rather than lifting just the midtones, we've lifted it all. We've lifted the exposure by almost double what it was. We've lifted brightness by a bit. And then we've just calmed down this luma range or luma curve. So we've stopped it lifting all of the middle stuff up to be great and all of the shadows up to be brighter. And instead left some of the shadows where they were. This line is now flatter down here than it is here. So we leave some of the shadows there, leave some depth. Still lift your brights. So if we look at this number here, let's just put my mouse over here, look at the numbers at the top. So the brightest part on here is 219. Brightest part on here, actually we're brighter, 223. So my contrast has increased, and that's the key thing. This starts to almost glow down here in comparison to this, which seems flatter. So be careful with curves if you're trying to keep mid-tone contrast. Most of the contrast of this Kingfisher sits, and you can see as I'm moving my mouse around, sits in these lower mid-tones. If you have a curve where you're just lifting that straight up, all you're doing is you're bringing your mid-tones effectively closer to your highlights, and you're bringing your shadows closer to your mid-tones. So all of that complication effectively of trying to squish all that data into the middle part of your contrast curve means that everything becomes less 3D, less contrasty, less detailed almost. There's less depth. I think that's the key thing. Matt, first time on the channel. Well done. Would a dust spot remove on the tone curve identify noise? Yes. So for those of you that don't know, have a look in. It'll be in Pro Tips on this channel, but it'll also, you can search for it. You'll find videos where we've done dust spot removal. I have a funky little layer, and in my curve, I have a dust spot rainbow finder. Some people say rainbow splat, some people say yuck delete, or your choice what you want to call it. But it's effectively an RGB curve that does this. And that will show us, it doesn't necessarily show noise in the way that you're expecting. It will show us where contrast changes quickly, and noise can be a part of that. So you can get to the point of seeing certain bits of noise. You will definitely see things like single pixels. You will definitely see things like dust spots, of which there don't seem to be many on here. You will see, this is interesting, look at that, there and there, this line. What is that? Interesting. There is a line, yeah. So it's this is the original here, the before. There's a line of this stuff. Everyone said rag. There's a line of this stuff, very faint, so you wouldn't notice it necessarily from here. But of course, when you put on a high contrast curve, these become very obvious down here. So use it for dust spots. Use it to spot where you've got a big noise issue. But for example, on the bird itself, because the bird's textures are so intricate and the changes in contrast levels and all that sort of stuff, you're not necessarily going to see it stand out. You will see it though, as you can do here in the background. So we can see that there is noise in there. It's just that we're not seeing it with our visible eyes because it's not big enough contrast. Okay, so to me, I mean, that would be the only change on it. I might try and get picky with some of this stuff connected to the twig, but that to me would be enough. I'm not a fan of this extra bit hanging there, so if it were my shot, I would be tempted. This is a 3x2, I'm guessing, so it's just, I'd be tempted to pull him down to a third, just have there, and I think that's just a slightly nicer or more intimate crop on there. I'd be tempted to knock out that little bit as a result. So a new healing layer. So press the Q button on the keyboard. I chose my origin rather than letting Capture One pick a random one off the side. But in general, it's a decent edit. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just there's probably a nicer way of getting the recovery on the Kingfisher without introducing huge amounts of noise and keeping some of that contrast without flattening it all out. Okay. Alan, square crop. Maybe. The only thing I'd think with the square crop is I'd quite like that branch coming in from the left-hand side. Otherwise, it's sort of hanging in midair. I think I prefer that one personally, but again, it's personal, isn't it? People's taste. So there we go, Edwin. Right, Roland, onto your shot of lightning. Now I mentioned that we are going to come onto this a bit of a second ago because of film simulation. So here's a fun one. Roland shot this. I'm going to create a brand new variant as a film simulation, and the film simulation that was chosen was, I think, Roland, you said it was the Acros, film simulation, the black and white one, basically. But has now decided, after taking the picture, that he would prefer it in colour. No problem there. But as you all know, I'm a big fan of before and after. So the problem with this is because that film simulation is baked in by the camera and through into Capture One, whenever I do a before and after, I can't have now a baseline color before. Doesn't exist, because my before is always going to be that black and white Acros film simulation. So it's wonderful that you can change your film simulation later on in Capture One. It doesn't mean you shouldn't choose wisely when you're out in the field. Because what that means, and so Roland, to settle your nerves, there is a different way of doing before and after that fixes this kind of thing. So you switch to film standard. Okay. If I want to do this, I could do a new variant. I would probably do a new variant from the start, but because you've got some edits in here, let's just get rid of all of these layers of your edits. Make sure that we don't have anything in terms of vignettes or anything like that. No, great. So I now have, this is effectively, to all intents and purposes, this is my before, because it is my before with the film standard curve applied. And this is my after. So while I can't swap, so even on this one, if I go before and after, the before is always going to be in black and white because that was what was baked in from the Fuji camera. We get that. But the way that you can now do before and after is by selecting both of them at the same time, and you can then compare. I would still use the before and after compare. I want to check that I'm not going crazy and not doing anything stupid or ramping to 11 on any slider. But yes, it does make it more difficult when your before is baked in with a film simulation or recipe that you don't want now. You now want to do color. You've got no baseline to compare to. I get it. Unfortunately, there's no real way of dealing with that. Other than shoot everything in your camera normally and then apply the film profile later. But most people don't want to do that because you want the JPEG embedded with the film simulation. So this is an edit, however. I actually quite like the edit. It says surprised. Shouldn't be surprised. Let's create a new variant. I just want to have a look. So overall, yeah, too much foreground in here. I agree. Detail in the sky is quite nice. It's not a particularly exciting city scheme, but this was some sheet lightning. So there's our before out of camera, effectively, with our shot white balance. Here's our after with a custom white balance. So if I were to undo that, it's not having a huge amount of change. What's going on? Sky, have we got a... Yeah. So there's a layer with the sky, and you can see there's that change there in the white balance, which is got rid of the pink, basically made it moodier and blue. I would say you kind of need the buildings to lift a little bit. I'm a bit anxious about the buildings towards the edges, so I don't want anything in the building. I'm just going to make a new version of that for me. I don't want the buildings to look so abruptly cut off at the edge that it's obviously been lifted. And at the moment with that mask, the mask is very accurate, don't get me wrong, but it's going to look a little bit fake. Also in that mask, switch to a grayscale mask. So up here, display grayscale buildings. Look at this stuff up here. And while it's subtle, all this stuff up here, anything you do to your buildings is also happening in the sky. So again, a case for getting the mask nice and clean. So let's go on to an eraser. There. Get rid of all that stuff in the sky. And then with our buildings, I'm going to go into my refine button and just allow Capture One to just spread around from the building a little bit so that any changes I do make are less abrupt at the edge. And I know the temptation is to darken them down and make the sky the star of the show, but if you're trying to get that sort of contrast or the mid-tone contrast back, you could do with just lifting those buildings a little bit. So not up to there, it's not turn the lights on, but I would say maybe to there to keep my context. So the sky overall, pulled down saturation makes sense because we don't want that color shift going on. Shadows being pulled down, highlights being brought up. It's interesting, isn't it? I personally would prefer to see more detail in that sheet lightning. So my gut feel would actually be to leave the highlights either down or negative. And the same with white, just to see a bit more detail. The sky contrast. What is that? There's a luma curve there. So this curve effectively is darkening down anything down here, which is all of this stuff up here. And here we're lightening, excuse the pump, all of the grays. Now this is where I get a little bit confused as to what the aim is, because if we're trying to get, again, more clarity, more detail, more mid-tone contrast, more grit into this, surely I want to separate my darker areas from my lighter areas. And at the moment, the lighter areas being the lightning are so light that I would argue this doesn't need to be lifted. You could actually pull these down. I'm not even sure what effect that's even having. Oh, it is having there. Yeah. So I'd be sort of there, which is a slightly, it's a reduced part, or a reduced amount of midtone, just to make sure the midtones are darker than the brighter parts of the image. Paula, if you crop an image and create a subject mask, would you expect Capture One to create the mask outside the crop? Because it does. Yes. Yeah, I would. Because your crop is variable, so it's actually doing you a favor. Some people crop early, some people crop late. It doesn't really matter, but the point being, your masks extend beyond any crop. Even if you do, so if you think about a gradient mask, imagine you cropped, drew a gradient, and then you expand the crop. Well, you don't want it losing, you don't want it just stopping where you cropped before, right? You want it to carry on. So I would say that should be the right behavior, and I believe it does. Yeah. Deep sky, Joe. Interesting. Let's try. So let's go to my style brushes, which are built in. Built-in style brushes, enhancements, deep sky. Draw one. I'm going to get a new layer. I'm going to clear that mask, and then I'm going to use my AI brush to select the sky, hence the deep sky brush. Let's just make sure we're getting all of the sky that we can. Yep. Right, let's have a look. Bit apocalyptic. So that's without, and that's with. I don't hate it, but I think it's too much. So it's not a bad shout, Joe. It's just, it's probably a bit too heavy. So maybe we go, down to 40% of that. But it does add something. I'll give you that. Now I would be in a place of, rather than, we've already lit the buildings up a little bit. I'm tempted just to light them up a little bit more. But new layer, graduated filter. Talking about graduated filters. And with this one, I'm just going to pull down that exposure nearer the frame. So why? If you think about it, I want the viewer to move their gaze up into the frame, up towards the lightning, up towards the horizon with this building on it. I want them to look at this part of the image with these layers. I want the buildings to stand out, but I don't want them to take away attention from there. I still want to push the viewer up. Without this layer, these buildings here start to grab some attention. So by putting in a very subtle linear mask and reducing it by 0.8, maybe 1 stop, we're just pushing the gaze further up into the frame, and it goes from there to there. And I would say that's a way of adding contrast without it going too far, without us pushing our highlights too much. I mean, there are some that are at risk of overexposure there, but they're not actually hitting it. I think the original, maybe we did have some, had some overexposure. So the recovery is good. Done the right things, Roland. So I'd say it's a nice edit. You've done well. Personally, I'd want to see a bit more of the building as context. Maybe not actually even that much. We can back that away a little bit. I just don't want to darken it down too much. And make this a bit more ferocious. And actually, Joe, using Deep Sky is not a bad shout, actually, in that. Cool. Right. Drone. Again, let's talk about mid-tone contrast. So let's look at the histogram of this shot. This is one of those tricky ones because our histogram is perfect for a linear response. Right? We've got some really bright highlights and really, well, not quite dark shadows, but certainly down there. I would be tempted, so the default position to be in with this, a lot of people would be, is to change this auto to say linear response. And we get a lot more detail in. And I would say it's not a bad shout. Number one, look at the clouds. Number two, look at the texture in these mountains. Now, just to be clear, this here doesn't have, I don't think from memory, any edits applied to it. So if I go to a before and after, there is nothing. This is purely the difference that this curve can make from film standard, which is what this is, to linear response. Now, here's the thing. Normally, when we do a linear response, everything goes flat and mushy and, oh no, we've got to bring in some contrast, right? It gets annoying. Well, in here, I'm going to have to do the reverse. So this is all about where my starting point is, because in this one, let's pull down our highlights. I get some cloud back. Maybe let's pull down some shadow as well. I get some depth back. So I've got depth now, but it still feels quite fabricated. This feels a lot more natural. So I get to a point where if starting from linear response gets you closer to your destination, why wouldn't you start there? It makes sense. So on this shot here, if I want the viewer to start looking up the valley and start seeing all the texture that's up here, maybe ignoring this part here, all I'm going to do is follow some of the lines. So my AI brush isn't too much use to me right here because it's going to pick the whole mountain, unless I tell it I just want maybe up to there, and maybe this triangle here, and this triangle here. That's not a bad shout. I could have drawn that by hand. But the key thing is we're going to refine it and soften it to within an inch of its life. So we go to there. And if that's not soft enough, refine again. Good. And hit apply. So that's right-hand side hill. Now let's go left-hand side hill. Let's just see if it can grab. Yeah, oh, nearly there. Pretty good. So same thing, refine, hit apply, refine, hit apply. So I now have two masks. One on the left-hand side hill, one on the right-hand side hill. I'm going to decide what to do about this pathway in a minute, but for now, these two alone, I'm going to pull down a little bit of exposure. and also pull up some clarity. Not a lot, but enough to make a difference. Also might do a touch of dehaze, but again, it's all subtle, small amounts on this one. Left-hand side hill. I might choose to put a bit of clarity in there again, but I'm also going to drop down my exposure a touch. And in fact, that makes me think my right-hand side is too much, so I'm going to go back to maybe there. If I think it's adding too much contrast, which is what we're talking about, I can always use brightness, which is a way of doing it without adding huge amounts of extra contrast. Okay, let's have a look then at what we do up here. Let's grab all of this stuff, mountain. Let's grab this peak up here. You notice that I'm not just clicking in areas. So if I click there, it's going to grab the whole mountain. I'm drawing marquees over the areas that I absolutely want included in my overall mask. And I've just done a stupid thing, as you've all just seen, and no one interrupted me, of adding it to my existing layer. So let's just undo all of those. Love the undo button. It's wonderful, isn't it? Create a new one. So middle valley. Be careful with that, boys and girls. We can accidentally edit the existing layer. Right. Let's, with our middle valley, start with our middle mountain. Start with expanding that out to here. And expansion there. And remember, just like always, just like every week, I'm not too worried about the neatness of this because we're going to refine it. And refining means that we're allowing Capture One to work out what it thinks is connected in terms of visual similarity. So let's go into my grayscale mask, Option and M again, or up here, display grayscale mask. Refine. Maximum. Did a pretty good job, right? Not much work needed there. We don't need to do it again, so that's good. So with this layer, this is the fun one. Let's add a little bit of warmth into that light. A little bit of tint away from green. A big chunk of clarity. Quite a lot of dehaze. More clarity, in fact. A little bit of structure. That sort of works for me. Okay, now, final one. In terms of layers. Do we do deep sky? Do we do a Joe? Let's try it. So I think deep sky actually might work quite nicely on here. Let's just then remove the mask from deep sky. So again, I clicked the style brush, clicked anywhere. It doesn't really matter because I'm going to remove that mask. And now, keeping on the same layer, I'm going to use the AI brush to add in that sky. And I think that's done a pretty nice job. Yeah, it's done a good job up there. I want to be careful up here. So it's not perfectly sharp, this shot, just to be very clear. I want to make sure that my mask, yeah, you see, it's starting to encroach on that mountain. And you're starting to, because deep sky lifts the lights and the whites, unfortunately, it can have this effect where it starts to bleach the edges of mountains. So be careful with that. Hopefully, if I do an AI eraser up to, come on, there. I just need to make sure that it's not obvious by leaving a bit of a gap right at the edge. Let's have a look. That's actually done a pretty good job of keeping it. Yeah, okay, happy with that. That would be where I'm at. So here's the irony. We always talk about linear response being the one that we use to calm down high contrast. Well, this was the film standard. We want more contrast in there, and we've started from linear response. That's got quite a bit of presence to it, right? I would actually be tempted, despite what we've spent on our lenses getting rid of this, but I would put in a little bit of vignette into there, maybe a bit of overall dehaze, and then personally, I'd be tempted to push these levels up a little bit. Turn your exposure warning on, click on a new layer, fill it, and then with that layer, we're going to do this until we start seeing it appear up here, okay? So I've added in some extra contrast. but it's cost me because I've got some highlights here that are blown. Well, that's very easy because this is a mask, right? So I can now go in with my eraser, or in fact, let's go even further. Ooh, good point in my head. We're going to add a luma range. And I'm going to say this mask include everything apart from the stuff that was already getting a bit too bright. We've got rid of most of that exposure. It's good. Okay. Right, Roland, isn't Deep Sky too much distracting from the mountains? Possibly, but the advantage of having it here on a layer is we can always dial it back. But the reality is, just to be clear, without that layer, this is what linear response gives you out of the clouds. The reason you don't see them here is because they're overexposed. It's an incorrect exposure in that sense. They're overblown. So it depends on if you wanted to overblow them, in which case, fine, leave it as film standard. But if you do want to see them, then the linear response gets them to you. All Deep Sky is doing is just making it a bit more impactful. But we can wind it back down. Paula, personally, I like those subdued colours. I'm not sure which colours, though. Do you mean these ones or these ones? Don't know. But either way, it's choices, right? So in terms of edit, you might want this as a bit of a bright, sort of punchy exposure. This one here is a lot more. I would argue this is more subdued. It's more muted, but there's a lot more contrast in here. But all that contrast you control. So most of it, funnily enough, isn't coming from contrast. The reason it's not coming from contrast, just so we're clear, look at this left-hand side hill. Look at my mask, okay, and watch the orange area on my histogram, okay. It never goes above the midpoint. So if I use the contrast tool on this layer, all that's going to happen, so contrast tool looks at the midpoint and says anything right, make it brighter, anything left, make it darker, in very simplified terms. So if I add contrast, all that happens is this is going to go dark because it's all in the lower tones. Same with the sky. So the sky up here is all in the upper tones. If I add contrast or more contrast, all that happens is it's going to get brighter. It doesn't make sense. So in this sense, the contrast tool doesn't help you. Clarity of the mid-tone adjustment tool really does. Okay, so you can be in a place where mixing between the two, somewhere in the middle. You know, you could literally just back away all of these by 50%. So we could go adjustment layer here, roughly. Image we didn't do much. So you have there, you have a linear response that's quite subdued, subtle. Then you have a linear response that's got a lot more contrast built back into it because we've had to add contrast and linear response took it out. There we go. Right. So there you go. That was drones. And then Bob, very briefly. In fact, we might actually start with this one next week. Bob's challenge is to make this lake look more placid like it was. You said Sacramento Delta. The challenge I have, Bob, is it started out more placid. So that was the out of camera or the before. This is with the edits. My worry is I think in trying to make it more placid, we've actually added more contrast, more pop, more boom. And the downside is the result is you've also got some artifacts in here now as a result. So this looks relatively noise free. All of that crunchiness delivers in here some significant amounts of noise if I look from there to there. So yeah, let's do this properly. We'll give it the time it needs. So we'll start next week with this shot, and we'll get it back to placid, but we'll get it in a way that still pops. So don't worry, easy fix ish. So there we go. Right, Joan's ironically more contrasty linear response mountain than the film standard one. Well, arguably there's more contrast in there, but this has got more usable detail. Roland's lightning shot, and just a reminder with film simulations. Just bear in mind that your base is going back to what you set in your camera. And Edwin's Kingfisher, nothing wrong with this as an edit. It's just there's quite a lot of noise that's been introduced. Be careful with your subject masks down here, and try and keep some contrast in there, especially in the midtones. It's what makes these things look 3D. these things. What makes nature look 3D? If you flatten everything, and one of the ways of doing that is to lift the midtones in a Luma curve, you're going to find that you lose a lot of that depth because you're effectively crushing shadows towards the midtones, and you're bringing highlights there. You end up with quite a flat image, especially when it's subject specific like this, and especially the difference in contrast between this light feather and the dark feather isn't 0 to 255. It's more subtle than that, and we need to expand that, not make it tighter. So, as I say, for those of you that are, there we go. You got work to do, Evan. For those of you that are online, carry on there for the time being. We have got masterclasses still on there. There will be more coming. I keep saying that, but they are. You have access to all of those pro tips, which covers in there things like the the rainbow filter. Do update your mobile if you have Capture One mobile. The new features are quite fun to play with. Be careful with this one. I'm sure Capture One will put a notice out when they can. And that means that they've tested it and they're happy to support it, and you're not on your own if it goes wrong. But we'll see you next week. So between now and then, upload all of your files into that particular place. There we go. Or refilllive.wetransfer.com. And we'll see you in a week. Cheers, everyone. Bye bye.